Hello, everyone. I'm Stephen Bartkus, the director of the Ridgefield Historical Society. I'd like to welcome you to the Ridgefield History Club here at the Scott House in Ridgefield, Connecticut. Today's date is Tuesday, June 20th, 2023. The Ridgefield Historical Society is dedicated to preserving, interpreting, and fostering public knowledge of Ridgefield's cultural, historical, and architectural heritage from the Native Americans who lived here over 10,000 years ago all the way up to the present day. And we welcome you to get involved here at the Historical Society by becoming a volunteer, a member, or a donor. The Ridgefield History Club is a program of the Historical Society, and it's scheduled to meet regularly throughout the year to discuss the unique history of Ridgefield and all its villages. This is an informal community storytelling program. It's not a presentation or a lecture, where we all sit in a circle here to share the memories and the stories related to different topics in Ridgefield's history. This discussion is being audio recorded, and it will be cataloged in the Historical Society's archive to preserve your memories about all of Ridgefield's people, places, and events for future generations. And we also encourage you to bring photographs and objects relating to the topics of discussion to show up and to show and share with everyone else in attendance. And I see we have some great photographs out on display on the table. So today's session is about Ridgefield's Italian American community. And as a newcomer here to town, I'm very interested in hearing all of your stories about who these people were and why they came to Ridgefield, Connecticut, where they worked and where they lived, and all about their stories. So I'm very interested to hear if your families immigrated from Italy and what brought them here to Ridgefield. There are only 2 rules for this program. It's important that everyone say their first and last name before they share a story so we could know who you are on the recording. And it's also important that only one person speak at a time, because the recorder will not be able to decipher between multiple conversations. So as long as we could keep to those 2 rules, this should be a very interesting program. I'd like to start by going around the room very briefly. If everyone could introduce themselves, perhaps you could share your name with everyone else here. And let's start to my left.
Hi, I'm Sam Bazarian. I'm one of the interns here at the Ridgefield Historical Society.
Thanks.
I'm Ruth Van Niemenhausen. I'm the administrator here at the Historical Society.
I'm Jane Presco. I'm another one of the interns here.
Darla Shaw, I'm a volunteer.
Thank you.
Jessie Alpinetti. I'm a guest, I guess.
Nice.
Ed Albinetti, here for the to learn something.
Great, thank you.
Joe Marilangas, lifelong resident of Ridgefield.
Thank you.
Lynn Castrid Mullen, also a lifelong resident of Ridgefield.
Thanks.
Sandy Perry-Andrew Mosiello, also grew up here.
Elaine Perry-Andrew Kellerman.
Macklin Reed, I grew up in town, still live here.
I'm Ray Sementini. I'm more of a recent import from Stanford. I grew up there. Most of my years have been there.
Great, welcome.
I'm Jake Contessa. My grandparents immigrated here in the 1900s.
Nice.
3rd generation Ridgefield.
Great, welcome.
Don Massoli, I'm a resident of the station. I was called the station. Station. Not that I'm passing through.
I'm Dick Natoli. I'm here now for about 5 months, 6 months. I'm enjoying it tremendously.
Don Hale, I'm also a resident of the Ridgefield Station. Been there 2 years. My sentence will be up next year. Okay, thank you.
Jean Jacobs. We lived here since '62, but I'm here because I teach the Gilded Age at the Tavern, and we're all so much a part of that.
Thank you.
I
I'm Barbara Torsellini Surfilippi, and almost a lifelong resident, except for the first 5 years. And I've been here as a volunteer as well.
Thank you.
I'm Joyce Casavecchio Ligi, and I am a Ridgefield native.
Thanks.
I'm Mimi Dalby. I've been here 27 years.
Oh, welcome.
I'm Lenore Schneider, just recently retired high school history teacher. I live in Ridgefield, but I was teaching high school in New Canaan.
Thank you.
Joe Ocasio, a visitor and 33-year resident.
Thank you.
I'm Sarah Shepard. I'm another intern.
Francesco Caro, I'm also an intern.
Great. Thank you all so much. Who would like to start? Did any of your families immigrate from Italy? And could you tell me, if they did, what's their story? What's their immigration story? And how did they come here? Why did they come here? Why did they pick Ridgefield?
I'll start. Hello again, everybody. Ed Albenetti. I live in Danbury. No Pennsylvania. My mother is from Ridgefield. Her parents immigrated to the States. I believe my grandfather, Costantino Severini, came here in 1908. He was married in Italy at the time to my grandmother, Antonia Balbusti Severini. He came a year early because she was at the time pregnant with their oldest child, my Aunt Sistina, Aunt Sis. The story was, he was a stonemason. The story was that he was recruited in Italy to come to the States to work on the New York City reservoir system. And first lived in, I guess, North Salem, then to Ridgefield. They lived on either Bailey Avenue or Prospect Street. According to my mother, they moved around some. And then my grandfather, I think in the late 30s, early 40s, he built his house on Roberts Lane.
Yes.
Nice little brick house, which is that's what I remember. In the 50s, the whole family came there every Sunday for dinner. And my grandmother and grandfather had a very large garden in back, and my grandmother had a chicken coop. And my mother, Mary Severini, also had two brothers, Reno Severini and John Lally Severini. Reno married Teresa Carboni, and they lived in town their whole lives. And my grandfather, as I said, was a stonemason. And what I like to talk about is his style of his stonework was very unique. He helped build the Italian Club, and if you ever look at the stone wall, the big stone wall behind the Italian Club, the stonework has a very unique style to it. He also built, I'm sure you're aware of the stone house, the corner of Route 35 and Route 7. He built that, or was one of the masons, and the style of the stonework is very similar, is exactly the same. He also built what was the Red Lion right next to the old stone house, which was originally Colonel Connolly's dog kennel.
Yeah.
And the two ends, the stonework was exactly the same. He also built the Lord's Grotto in Brookfield with my grandfather and two Portuguese laborers built that in the 30s. And my mother used to say how happy they were that he got work, because work was so scarce at the time. So even though I live in Danbury, I have very fond memories of Ridgefield as a child, and being here basically every week and visiting my grandparents. Also, I have several photographs of my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary. This was 1958, their wedding anniversary at the Italian Club. So I will pass those around. And I have a few color photographs of Aldo Tulipani, if anybody knows Tulipani's. Tremendous accordion player, a true gentleman, and he was my last. He was the last person I tortured trying to teach me the accordion. And this was actually I took lessons as a kid, but this was actually after I got out of the Air Force. and we bought our first house in the early 80s. And I decided, geez, maybe I'll try to learn to play the accordion again. And Aldo was my teacher, and he was just a tremendous guy. So I'll pass those around, and that's my basic story.
Nice.
Thank you so much. That was very interesting. Does anyone else have a story they'd like to share?
My name is Elaine Perry-Entry. I know more of the history of my mother's family, the Cecchini family. My grandfather, Gaetano Giardini, there's a record of him coming in 1906, coming to Ridgefield. I have letters that he wrote to my grandmother in Italy, encouraging her to come. In September of 1913, my grandmother came with her two brothers, Uncle Al and Uncle Ned. The two brothers went to Poughkeepsie. My grandmother and my grandfather, according to my mother, were married in the Great Hall at Ellis Island upon arrival. There was a society called the St. Raphael Society who was very instrumental in supporting Italian immigrants. They came to Ridgefield. My mother, until she was 9 years old, lived right across the street here. There's a greenhouse, and if you look at the house, you can, on the basement, you can see an opening. My grandfather and Mr. May, M-E-I, had a tavern in the basement. The May family lived on the first floor, and the Giardini family lived on the second floor. And in 1923, my grandfather bought the house on Prospect Street, which is now 63 Prospect, and they moved there. And my mother lived in the house for 93 years, from the time she was 9 until she died at 102.
That's amazing. Wow, thank you so much. That's an incredible story. Does anyone else have a story they'd like to share? Well, there are some interesting things that came up. I heard the Italian Club mentioned. Could anyone tell me more about the Italian Club, where it was located, what took place there?
You have Elaine, you have a picture right there of the members of the Italian Club.
The original.
The original members standing in front of the club.
Okay.
It was on that table.
Okay, great.
I have a question. Is that the same property that it's on right now?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Just to add a little bit about it, it was established as a mutual aid society. And the members paid dues every month. If for some reason they were sick, they would get money every month. They had to show that they were legitimately ill and couldn't work. And they also had a death benefit, that if you died, there was a small amount of money that was given to. But it kind of like an insurance policy that they bought into.
Barb, when was it started?
Pardon me?
When was it started?
Well, that picture that you
I just
showed had to be, we couldn't identify our grandparents in it, so it had to be early 1900s. They belonged to it, but they weren't in that picture. So
Barbara,
yes,
Our grandfather was in that.
Your grandfather.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but I have
that's a different picture.
Is this
Maybe-
a different one?
No, it's a
Yeah,
copy.
that's different, I think.
It's a little different, but this
Yes.
is the original.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
We had the 1913, was it? 1913?
I did it this when it was authenticated.
1913.
Can I see that book?
And the club was built by all the members.
Oh, it was.
They built it.
Really?
They were masons, they were carpenters, they built that original building. They didn't hire anybody. They all did the work themselves. Up until almost the day that they closed down, it was always a volunteer group of people.
Really? Now, could you tell me what took place there? Would people go there every week? What types of activities took place there?
Well, there was a great bar downstairs. And they all liked to go there after they finished work. Weddings, lot of weddings. I got married, my reception was there, maybe some of yours too.
My mother's 90th birthday.
Yeah.
The bar is still functioning.
Yeah, the bar is still functioning, but not the upstairs, of course, it's been sold to the market. But, yeah, they catered many different events.
So
I had a great
once a month,
field day once a year.
Right.
They had porchetta and chickens and games and dancing and a lot of fun.
Right.
They had Carnival before Lent, where they had Castagnoy and Criscioli.
Yes.
Can anybody talk about the oven that they made the porchetta in? There was like some special.
The building
Yes.
behind,
oven.
they
Yeah.
built one, the building in back of the parking lot was built specifically for roasting pigs.
Right.
And the way I understand it, they started the fire in there like a week before they were gonna actually roast the pigs to get the whole building, hot enough. The book, is a great book,
It
Impact.
is Impact. Yes.
And there are many mentions of the regular meetings and the minutes from the regular meetings, whether they're monthly or whatever.
Yeah, I have the,
My grandfather
Yeah.
was the one that not only raised the pigs for the pig farm, but he also built the oven.
Yes.
And I cook pigs to this day, this time generational.
Yeah, we have to talk.
Yeah. But that was the old style brick they put together. As kids would go down there and help them, man the fire. And then, but he raised all the pigs here in Ridgefield.
My grandfather always had a jar of pig blood
Yes.
cooked, I guess, in the refrigerator.
Oh, and what was that for?
Blood pudding.
Yeah.
They ate everything on the pig but the tail.
Everything
That's
but
why they
sweet.
raised pigs.
Yeah.
Everything but the squeal.
Oh, the squeak. Okay, I thought it was the tail.
Everything but the squeal.
But they did make blood pudding, and the
Yeah.
mother used to say, Mr. Fossey, Jay's grandfather, was the master of the pig roast. And
in one of the recent
they left the
years,
blood pudding.
I'm sorry, in one of the recent years, I helped Mr. Montanari sew the pig.
Yep.
Yeah, or prepare it. I didn't sew it. I helped him prepare it. Yeah.
And how many pigs would they roast in the oven?
I only remember the one.
Okay.
I don't know.
Oh yeah, they
think
did
it
about
was one.
4 to 5.
Wow.
Yeah, towards the end, each year it got bigger and bigger and bigger, and so, it was more and more and more.
That was for
It
the
was quite a
field.
production.
That was for the field day you're talking
Yeah,
about?
field day. Yeah.
Who owns the building right now?
Club.
They still own, they still
The
own.
club.
They still own
The
it.
club. So the club is a corporation of some sort.
We probably just recently lost our oldest member,
Yes.
Bob Tulpiani.
Penny.
Yeah.
After Bob, there aren't too many. My husband still belongs. But
And it closed because of financial reasons, apparently. I mean, it closed the upstairs part.
I think there weren't enough Italians.
yeah.
That's basically.
I don't think it's the volunteers.
Yes, it was a
It's the
volunteer.
volunteers. They,
But I've been to dinners there where, I mean, it was packed.
Yeah.
I agree.
Jam packed.
But those dinners take volunteers,
I understand.
so that's
And
where,
that's what did it, right?
Yes.
These photographs were taken in the hall upstairs during my grandparents' 50th wedding anniversary.
I think an interesting thing about the membership, correct me if I'm wrong, but you couldn't join
Yes.
unless, if your father had to be Italian,
Italian.
right?
Right.
If your mother was, you could not join
No.
Right.
when it was first established.
Really?
When it was
They-
first,
They changed
you
that
had to be
ruling
of
after
Italian.
many, many
Yes.
years, because we became very scarce. But that was a big bugaboo back then.
Another thing, I tried to join years ago. My grandfather was, I believe, one of the founding members. They wouldn't let me join because I lived in Danbury.
Yeah, oh, yes,
So Ridgefield was always the Market John Club.
that's right.
Danbury was the Calabrese Club.
Yeah.
I had to join the Calabrese Club because they wouldn't let me in the Market John Club.
That's right.
And they didn't want, even in the club in Danbury, I was kind of looked down on because my family was from the north. Northfield.
That's tough. I have a question.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, in our archive, we have a wooden box with a handle, black and white marbles, and it was a voting machine for the Italian club. That's all we know. But I don't know if it was to decide what was it used for. Does anyone have any recollection of that?
I belonged to a junior Grange group when I was a kid, and we had one of those. And when people wanted to join, we would all put a marble in the box, and I forget, were they mostly white? And there was one black one, I
It's
think.
like a half and half.
Oh, and ours, it was just one odd one, and that would be a no vote.
Right.
Yeah, I remember one time somebody actually put the black one in, and we had to, vote over again. It was just kids. But, yeah, I remember that box very well.
Great. You had a question?
Well, I have an observation,
Sure.
and I'm curious as to whether any of you share it. My grandmother tells me that she and her husband were married around 1908. They had a child, and around that time, 1910 perhaps, an agent came to town. They were on a hilltop in Sicily, Nato. An agent came to town recruiting young Italian men to come to the States. And that's how they got to Ellis Island and to New York. They had no money.
Yeah.
And they would have not been able to leave the hilltop. I mean, the only way out was with a mule, and it was like 100 miles to Palermo, and there was really no place to go. They arrived in Ellis Island and Lower East Side and had 2 more children. In 1916, my grandfather was called back to Italy on the penalty of losing his citizenship. Fearful of losing his citizenship, he returned to Sicily, conscripted into the military. Within 6 months, he's dead on the battlefield. Gets more interesting. By this time, my grandmother has 3 children, and now she's in Sicily on the hilltop, and she's pregnant with my mother. And she can't get back to the United States because she was not worth anything to the agents. They were looking for males who could work. A woman with 3 children was not in demand. And she had to make arrangements with a relative who had previously arrived for sponsorship. And that arrangement was an arranged marriage, actually. And that got her back to the United States with her 3 children. I'm curious as to whether this conscription was commonplace among your memories. How did they actually finance their way and sponsorship to the United States? Were they just the second or third family from the village, or were they the originals? I mean, I'm wondering, because apparently I understand there wasn't much remittances back to the home country by the Italians who were here in that early period. As opposed to, you hear about remittances where people are, go ahead.
No, that was very prevalent, sponsorship. My grandparents, Elaine and Sandy's grandparents, the Dardinis, sponsored them. They had to have a sponsor to come over and to get married.
And they financed, I guess. They paid for the trip.
No finance. No finance.
How did they raise the money on the other side?
That's a very good question, because they didn't have anything.
I'm trying to understand that part.
I don't know.
My grandfather was 18. Well, one of the times I have a record of him coming when he was 18. Whether he came before that and went back, I don't know. They came to Ridgefield because there's an argument on who the first Italian was in Ridgefield, but they came from Le Marche. They came from that province. And so succeeding men came because there were already people here. In fact, on this road here that is called Sunset Lane, was called Railroad Avenue. There were train tracks that went through, and there was a rooming house.
Yes.
Right across the street there, where the Italian men stayed. They came and they worked, and they stayed in in that rooming house. My grandfather left it when my grandmother came in 1913 because they got married, and then they set up, their own family house. But sponsorship was not money given. It was more guaranteeing that those people would be able to be good citizens and make a living for themselves, that they wouldn't be on the state wouldn't have to take care of them.
Not on welfare.
And that they had somewhere to go when they got here. They didn't come here and wander around. I mean, that's how it was supposed to work. I have the ship's manuscripts from my grandfather's family, and I think it's called manuscript. Maybe there's a better word, but nevertheless, it details right down to how much money my grandfather had in his pocket when he came. In other words, he was supposed to reveal that, and that was part of the requirement, I suppose, to get ship's passage and so forth and so on.
There was a market. Oh, excuse me.
No. I'm just thinking of other things, but not right now. Go ahead.
There was a Marquis John group in New Haven, a big Marquis John group in New Haven, and my mother's two uncles went to Poughkeepsie, and the rest came here because if you go back to Montrado, Costa Colonna, you go there, you go into a cemetery. All the names that you see at St. Mary's are the same names that you see there, except they're not buried in the ground. They're mausoleums with tombs built on top of each other. But all the Ridgefield names are there.
It's the same with my grandparents in Senegalia.
Yeah,
we've been there.
Right.
The Principes, the Montanari, the Marcajans. You think you're in St. Mary's Cemetery here.
Isn't there a connection to Stony Creek? The same Marcajans that went from, it came to Ridgefield, a bunch of them also went to Stony Creek, down to the side of New Haven.
Could be, yes.
Yes.
There's a big
Marquis John contingent in New Haven. I didn't know what it was called.
There's a big Marquis John club. You really have to be Marquis John to belong there.
Really? Was it in Stony Creek?
No, that's in New Haven.
In New Haven?
I had heard Stony Creek, but I'm
yeah, something like that.
Yeah, I think it's down that area.
Yes.
Because Romeo was involved.
Yes.
Darla?
I have a Yugoslavian immigrant background, but I've lived here for 55 years, and I had 3 amazing Italian friends, and you brought up the book, The Impact. I loved Aldo Biaggiani. He had a farm called Casa Something, and it was right across from the high school. And he was a teacher, and he was a federal agent. He had so many talents, and he was an author and a speaker. And when we first came here, he had an Italian radio program. And we don't speak Italian, but he was just so interesting in the music and everything. We would listen to Aldo, and that's how we basically got to know him. And he just loved his animals so much, and he grew figs, and he was a real farmer at heart. And he would come to my class at WestCon as an author, and he would show them this book. And he had these burros that he saved and adopted from Death Valley, Reginald and Dudley. And he would talk about these animals, and then he had to take them and give them another home because he got too old. And he wrote the most amazing stories. I mean, and they were simple. This was on his grandmother's coffee pot that ended up in Baghdad at the palace of Saddam Hussein because of his son. And this book is so interesting. And what I also like about the book is a Bob Tulipani story. And the book was selling originally, I don't know, was it $25, $35? You get it on eBay or something for $45 today. But you go to Bob Tulipani, and he had a cellar full of them. And you would get them for $5. They were signed, and you would get a big bag of Bob Tulipani's fresh tomatoes to go along with it. I mean, these were the most amazing men, and Ben and Aldo's friends and Bob Tulipani loved to make wine. They were great winemakers. And the last one that I wanted to talk about that was a good friend of mine and I loved dearly was Lince Carboni. He worked for the school system, was a courier, and that's how I got to know him. And he was a tiny guy, and he was known as Bones, the battling boxer, until his mother said, no, that's not safe, you can't do it. He fought in Norwalk or something. And he was a naval person. He came back, he was a plumber, he worked for the Ridgefield school system and maintenance. He did the most amazing thing. I have it here. Before he passed, I'd say 10 years before he passed, I have the most amazing letter from him. He decided that he would give $1,000 to people that he liked and were kind and caring and thought about others. I mean, when Ben and I got the letter and a check for $1,000, we were absolutely blown away. And he did this not for a lot of people that he really cared about. And I thought, what a great thing to do. And this is something that, you know, I intend to do too and was inspired. And so Ben and I took the $1,000 and we started a Lince Carboni scholarship every year at the high school. But these were three men that I knew that I thought represented the very, very best in Ridgefield.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else have any memories about people in the Italian American community here in Ridgefield that are no longer with us?
I just have a quick question on Lince. Is he the one that was an amazing dancer? Yeah.
I got to know Bob Tulipani through the American Legion, but only really got to know him and just known him for maybe the last 10 years or so. But he was always ready to talk about the history of the Italians in Ridgefield, and he was always interested in what I was doing, what my wife was doing, and so forth and so on. He was just a genuine type person that was good to know. It was good to know. I'm happy that I got to know him, as much as I did.
There was no history book for the young children in Ridgefield until, I don't know, the 1950s or something. And Bob Tulipani and Joe Laney wrote the book that the kids used for so many years.
Interesting. Does anyone have any other stories they'd like to share about how their family came to Ridgefield, or any other folks in the Italian community here that you recall from all your years of living here and growing up? There must be some interesting stories that you have to share.
Well, the immigrants, when they came over, many of them went to work over in North Salem at the Port of Missing Men. And they worked over there. They built all the roads for the Port of Missing Men, which later became the Eight Lakes Association. They had land in New York State and some in Ridgefield, up past Barrack Hill. And these immigrants lived in shanties. And probably some of our relatives my grandfather was drove the team of horses that built these roads. There were no tractors, there were no excavators back then. It was just labor and the horses, the teamster. Excuse me. And they lived in these shanties, which my father took me to see. And they really were shanties. There was nothing inside of them. But they lived there, they worked there. And Mr. Gasparini, who owned the Gasparini store down here on Prospect Street now, where the pizza place is, would provide them food. But it was very, very crude living, believe me. But they did it. And then after they worked there, then they went, some of them went to work on big estates. All of the big estates you see in Ridgefield, all the stone walls. That's who built them. Well, most of our ancestors. Because they were used to.
What was the port of missing then?
Well, it's a story that I don't know if it's true. It was owned by a big financier from Wall Street. And he built what they called the tea house. And I think your mother maybe worked up there, or some of our relatives worked up there as waitresses and waiters. And the businessmen from New York City, from Wall Street, would come up and at the tea house, because it's a beautiful spot. You overlooked the reservoir in New York City. It was absolutely beautiful. And they had lunch there. But one day, they never returned back to New York. I don't know where they went or what they did, but that's why they call it the Port of Missing Men. Now, whether that's a true story or not, I don't know. But that's what they called that.
So they would take a day trip up?
Yeah, they go up there for lunch.
And I think many of the men took their girlfriends.
Yeah.
Was this
That's why they were missing.
The wives got
Because
wives.
my mother worked up there, and my husband's uncle was a chef.
Yeah.
If you call it a chef, and I think they only served chicken.
Yeah, something like
that. They only,
Very
the
limited.
menu was very limited.
Yes.
That's
A lot
interesting.
of the
That's
women went up there to work at the tea house. It's a beautiful place,
Right.
beautiful view.
And I think you have many of the, well, you have menus or some of the articles from the tea house in your archives.
We have a big ledger that.
Yes, of the people when they signed it and when they arrived.
Yeah, I bet you some people would like to get their hands on that, right?
A lot of people from New York City.
Yeah. Well, that's
with chauffeurs.
Right.
Wow.
Where was it? Where?
It's off of 116.
Hunt Lane.
Hunt Lane. It's
Hunt
right
Lane in North Salem.
Right over the Connecticut line there.
If you go up Old Sid Road.
Yes, you can get that way
It's
too.
down towards the end of that, and you can still see the buildings there.
Well, it's
Well,
it's down, but
it's all new houses now. I mean, it's all
developed.
It's all developed. It's
So they were demolished. It was demolished. The tea house was demolished.
Oh,
Oh,
yes,
yes,
yeah,
it was
that was
demolished.
demolished years ago.
Yes, it was demolished. 50 years ago.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nothing there left anymore.
Yeah.
The Discovery Center used to do tours, but before that, I went on a tour. Is it Gino Torsolini?
No, it was my father, Donald.
He gave the tour.
Yes.
This is the best tour I have ever been on.
Yes.
It was supposed to be an hour. 3-hour tour. Everyone was like, I mean, he was amazing in what we learned. And it's like what you said and what you said, that they said the men wanted to take their secretaries, with them on this outing, So there were a lot of secretaries.
Yeah.
What was the time period of this kind of stuff?
19. My father was born in 1919, so around then, 1920, 1925, probably before the Depression, Yeah.
Was it a speakeasy as well? Like, could you get alcohol or anything?
That's prohibition.
Yeah, because it was
I don't know if they had
prohibition.
I don't don't know if they had alcohol. My
19,
mother never,
yeah,
I don't know. Oh, probably did.
or my in-laws never mentioned
They,
that.
they closed the bar over here.
But many
Most
of
of
the
them made
immigrants
their
were.
own.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
You know, really.
Your grandfather.
My grandfather,
It's the best.
they
We
had
had a thing
everything,
in the basement.
but all homemade.
My family, my aunt Gina Brancini Periandri worked for Claire Booth Luce, and my grandmother, after my grandfather died, started a laundry, and she had a hand laundry, and one of her patrons was Maud Bouvier Davis, who was Jacqueline Kennedy's aunt. And on Monday, Mrs. Davis would drive the laundry, but when it was done, my grandmother would take it back. And my favorite time to go was 4th of July. Mrs. Davis had a twin sister, Michelle Bouvier Scott Putnam, and their birthday was August 4th. But Mrs. Davis would have a birthday for the twins on July 4th because the Veterans Park School had fireworks. But the thing was, we would go in the back and we go up to the kitchen. The house is still there, but it's been completely redone, so it's not the way it was when Mrs. Davis. And we'd go in, and Caroline, Mrs. Davis's maid, would make tea for us, and we'd have tea. And then my favorite was Mrs. Davis would take me through the butler pantry into the dining room, which she had the table set. Now, for somebody like me, all crystal. Each place setting had a little bowl with a finger bowl with pansies floating in it. I don't know if you know, there used to be these little containers for salt with the little spoons. Each place had one of those little salts with a pepper. It was a very, very long table. It had all kinds of flowers, all kinds of glass, and she had a party. And it was always on July 4th, but their birthday was actually August 4th. Mrs. Davis lived in the summers in that house. She had 2 children, her daughter Maudie and her son Jack. I never met Jack, but Maudie was there quite a bit. She was a school teacher in New York City. And if you look at the house now, it's yellow on the outside and it's got a turret. That was Maudie's bedroom, and Mr. and Mrs. Davis had one on the left side as you look at the house. And if anybody had been to Hammersmith Farm in Newport, that's exactly what the house looked like in the inside. There was a yellow silk room, and then there was a blue silk room and a green silk room downstairs. It was exactly the same. And Hammersmith Farm was a relative of, was it a Jacqueline Kennedy's?
Yeah.
Bouvier's. So it was. Jacqueline's father was Mrs. Davis and Mrs. Putnam's brother, Black Jack Bouvier. And he had a house in Ridgefield.
So this house is one of those big mansions between like the police station and the middle school.
It's the house right next to the field, the football field.
Yeah.
Looking at, it's
On the ridge.
The
On the ridge,
yeah.
And her son,
Is it next to Sue's?
her
Sue
son,
Manning's house lives in it. It's yellow, but they put a pool in there because I was walking by one day and the man said to me who owned it, he said, "I always see you looking in the house," and I told him, I said, "I used to spend a lot of time," and he said, "Well, it's completely different. There's a pool in the back."
her son was also an author, I believe.
Yes, he wrote a book on the Jack on the family.
Right.
And then there was one more, a little known artist. His name was Robertson Kirkland Mygat, and he lived on. Is it not? It's where Whipstick and
It's not.
Nod at Whipstick and Nod Road. There's a house a white house on the corner, and as you walk down, I believe that might be yellow too. Robertson Kirkland Mygat was a artist, an impressionist of the tonal school. He lived in the house with his second wife, who was the sister of his first wife, and his sister-in-law. And their name was Mygatt, Robertson Kirkland Mygatt, Mygatt. And when he died, he asked his wife to burn all his paintings, which she never did.
No.
She never did it.
No, she never. There's evidently there's a gallery in New York where you can see them. But I gave the I had a christening dress that I think the tag in the package that in 1901 the christening dress was 100 years old. So you can imagine what it is now. So there were interesting people here, and the point I was trying to make is many of the Italian immigrants worked on the estates, as Barbara said, of those people.
When I talk about Dell, Dell was such an inspiration to so many people.
Thank you.
Let's talk about Italian food.
Yes, I was thinking the same thing.
As everyone knows, Italian food is very regional.
Yes.
And Ridgefield was Marchigiani. My grandmother was a cook, one of the cooks for the Italian club, and the food was always very, very, very unique. It's different than what most Americans think of as Italian food. It was funny, I'm used to my mother's sauce, and the only place I could ever had that besides my mother's house, my grandmother's house, in the Italian club. The first time we went to Italy, long story, dinner with my cousin took us out to dinner, and the sauce was just like my mother and my grandmother made. And I swear, I almost went to the kitchen to see if my grandmother was there because the sauce is so regional. But if you're interested in Marchigiani food, there's a food blog called Food on the Food.
Okay.
And it's written by a woman, I can't remember her name. She lives in Boston, but I believe she was from New Haven. And somewhere in her family history line, she was a Balbustis. My grandmother was a Balbusti before married to Severini. And I looked through the recipes on this food blog, and this is just like what I remember as a kid. Chicken potacchio, for example, is chicken cooked with vinegar. No one's ever heard of that. But check out that food blog, and for all these Marchigiani style recipes, it's fantastic.
Thank you. That's interesting.
I think arguably, to me, the best cook in Ridgefield over time was Vincenzina Puccetti. She was a fantastic cook. But the thing that I remember is I went to what everyone calls the old high school. For me, it's not the old high school because I started in that building in first grade and graduated as a senior. But the food program when I was in high school was run by Elvina DeLuca, and she had all the Italian women in town cooking. That was before you would get food from places and you just kind of serve it. There were actual people that went up there on the day that they had spaghetti.
Yeah.
And with spaghetti, always applesauce for dessert with that meal, spaghetti, a salad, and it wouldn't be students. There would be townies up there eating in the cafeteria.
And chicken for dessert?
Yes.
Oh, yeah. Homemade chicken fritters.
Yeah.
He was so right about the Marchigiani cooking is unique. We didn't have mozzarella or ricotta, but you think most Italian dishes today are. We didn't have those kind of things. It was very plain, but it was very excellent.
And another thing, nothing was ever made with garlic and onion.
That's right.
There was always one or the other.
One or the other.
And a lot of the sauces and such were, instead of being started with olive oil, they were started with salt pork.
Right. Oh,
Because-
yes. Absolutely.
Which gives food
Oh, it's a whole different taste.
completely different. Complete, string beans sautéed in a little with little oil from salt pork is an entirely different thing.
Yes. Yes. So it's unique. It's not like the rest of the regions in Italy.
Goes back to that's what they had.
Yep. Yeah. Well, olive oil wasn't in the northern part of Italy. Olive oil wasn't a common thing. But there was a lot of pig fat because they cooked on pigs.
That's what they used.
They had the secret recipe.
Did your grandmother use the cleaver that she put on the heat?
Yeah.
Take out the thing of salt pork and put the cleaver on the heat and then cut up the salt pork.
Quickly. So that
Right.
it didn't get hard yet.
Yeah.
And we can't forget the pasta that they used to make.
Oh,
Every Saturday afternoon, the big board would come out. They'd get the pasta
table.
Yeah, like that, and they would hand roll it, and there was no pasta machine, and my grandmother could cut the whatever pasta she was
Soya.
making, like without even looking at it. And I thought for sure she was going to lose her fingers. But that's the way they were taught when they were very, very young. And your mother knew how to make it. She started making it when she was a child.
Yeah.
And that's the way that the pasta was.
And the rolling pin
unbelievable.
was like this long.
Yes.
I mean, it wasn't this little.
Right.
Yeah.
I use a machine because I'm an old Italian woman. And actually, towards the end of my mother's life, she used a machine because her arthritis was so bad she couldn't roll it anymore.
My mother had a machine with a
we all did too.
with a motor
My
on
mother
it
said
at
she
the
could always
end.
tell the difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. It is. It comes out a little more rubbery from the machine than when you do it by hand.
And what was unique to the pasta sauce here? Cloves.
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Only people from Ridgefield know that.
That's right. It's very unique.
Oh yeah.
The Marcajan cooks.
And it has to be not overdone though. The cloves have to be subtle.
Yes.
Yes. You don't
Yes.
want it.
Yes.
Yes.
If it's not there, you have to know something's missing. You
Right.
really don't know what's
So you don't want it. You don't really want to taste it.
Yeah. It's just.
So what's the best place to get Italian food today?
What's that?
Where's the best place to get Italian food today?
Probably our kitchen.
My house.
Point taken. Point taken.
My dining meal would be my mother's ravioli.
Yeah.
That was my favorite.
Did she make it with the
But it
meat
had a
or the
meat
cheese?
filling.
Meat.
Yeah.
Meat and spinach.
Because we didn't have the cheese.
Meat and
We didn't
spinach.
do ricotta. We didn't do
Spinach,
Either
mozzarella.
spinach and chopped
Yeah,
meat.
spinach or Swiss chard.
Yeah,
Oh,
but
yeah.
some greens.
Yep. Oh, that's really. I've never talked to anyone who knows this, who knew this stuff. This is great. Wow.
But we also have to thought they were, well, I'm sorry, I talked too much.
Okay.
But they were wonderful gardeners.
Yeah.
And talk about the organic craze today. They started it back then. There was no fertilizer. There was nothing. Fertilizer came from the
Chicken coop.
chicken coop or the cow or the horse. But they were the best gardeners in the whole world. They knew how to grow everything. Flowers as well. One of my grandfathers was an expert on flowers gardening.
Isn't it strange that my mother told the ABC girls who came and talked to her about the Depression? She said, we had rabbits, we had
Yes.
chickens, we got eggs,
Eggs.
we had our own garden
Right.
in the back. She said, so we didn't suffer when it came
That's right.
to that because we were able to grow our own.
That's right. Our own food.
We were able to grow our own food.
Absolutely. They did. You're right.
Yeah, they did.
They always said that. They didn't suffer.
My grandmother used to go to Abbott Avenue to Mr. Costanzi's house to get the seeds for the Italian eggplant.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's not the ones you buy in the
Yeah,
store,
the
those
big,
big
right.
fat ones, and it's not the skinny Japanese kind. But Mr. Costanzi evidently would save the eggplant seeds, and I would drive over with her, and Mr. Costanzi would give her the eggplant seeds, and my dad planted them in the back in the garden. We had a hole in the ground for the milkman with a shelf in it, and he would bring the milk and he'd put the milk in this hole in the ground on the shelf, and it had a piece of slate on the.
Kept cold.
Yeah, keep it cold. Yeah, exactly.
Under the ground. Sure.
My mother and my aunt said they could never make sauce as good as their mother because my grandmother made her own tomato paste.
Years ago, they used to make that.
Yeah, he grew so many tomatoes. She made her own tomato paste.
They used to can
Yeah,
Now,
they grow tomatoes from the summer and then they use it to make the sauce in the winter.
speaking of chickens, the absolute worst smell in the world, a dead chicken being stuck in hot water to be
At Wayside, if you go in the back door, there was always somebody, you know, it wasn't, the chickens didn't come with the feathers out.
I know.
There was somebody sitting in the back, pulling the feathers out and singeing the back end of the chicken. And he always had, there was a machine there to make sausage. And Uncle Pete said to me, it's pork shoulder and pork butt and salt and pepper. And that's all.
That's all.
Yeah, nothing else. None of the things that are in it today.
Joe Brunetti had the best sausage in all of Ridgefield, right? Besides maybe your grandfather.
Which he made with Joe.
Yes, which he made with Joe.
My uncle Reno worked there and as a butcher too,
Yeah, the best sausage you'd ever have.
But it's only pork butt, pork shoulder, salt, and pepper.
Okay. That's all he used.
Yep.
No
Where's the
preservative.
cook serving lunch?
I know. You're making me hungry.
I'll have spaghetti and meatball.
Hey, can anyone reveal the secret of the porchetta at the Italian club? Like, what were the spices they put in that?
So it's
Jay would
very,
have,
very
right?
simple. Again, fennel is the flavor. A lot of garlic, salt, pepper.
That's
Fennel,
it.
salt, pepper.
No rosemary?
No,
rosemary.
not in the porchetta.
In fact, we've done it a couple of times with rosemary because it's these, natural that you would use.
Yeah.
And it's amazing how it changes the flavor. But it's just fennel, salt, pepper, garlic.
Yeah.
I can never get to steamed crisp.
Yeah, that's the whole secret.
That's the secret.
That is the secret.
So did you say you still roast pigs?
Yes.
Do you have, what kind of oven do you use for that?
Yeah, so I have a traditional old big brick that I've made, and this is still the best way to do it. A little bit more sophisticated. Instead of hand turning it, I have a small little motor that just slowly, just turns it. But I use the exact same recipe. My Uncle John, we all grew up with it.
Yeah, Tommy makes it.
Yeah, Tommy. And,
How long do you?
It's a long day.
Yeah.
It's a long day.
All day.
Yeah, we start out. The key is the fire. And Joyce said, it's days before. If you think it's hot, it's not. It's getting those coals that have been embedded for 3 or 4 days that just lay that heat down, and then that just
Use just wood or use coal at all?
No coal. Wood.
Just wood?
Yeah. We can control it better. When moving the fire around, because a pig is leaner down here and heavier up here, so it's again managing fire for you need more heat up here than you will down here, so that when you get done, it's all good.
I've only done a whole pig once, and it didn't come out that good.
I love it. I mean, it's just.
Oh yeah.
And anybody that tries, that's from
the good mark porchetta. Yeah, you can't get that anymore. No.
So where do you get your pigs?
a place up in Goshen. It's an organic pig grower, and so I'll drive up there and grab them. You can actually get like a Berkshire pig now, a breed that's been around for 200 years. So it's the same as what they would have had. So it's kind of more of a tradition, not a. I don't think you can tell the difference in taste, but.
So when you make, keep asking these recipe questions. When you do the garlic and the salt and the pepper and the fennel, do you kind of make it in? Do you make it into a paste?
No, so you. I'll give you the quick heavy.
It's not the
Take
dried
a pig,
fennel.
you open it up, and you actually use these garden shears, loppers, and you cut them as much of the bone away from the inside. You cut the ribs in half, and you create these valleys in there that when you salt, pepper, and garlic, and then when you put it back together, it has these pockets of where and as the pig gets hot, you can smell it as it's steaming inside from all that. So it's basically, based in itself inside as it turns. So, yeah, but it's very, like everything else, the Italians, it's pretty simple. They wasn't,
And the word cholesterol didn't exist.
That's right.
A little red wine and that was medicine. Grappa at Christmas.
It sounds wonderful. Does anyone else have any stories they'd like to share today? We're getting towards the end of our gathering here.
This is not about food. I'm sorry, I'm not a cook. But you mentioned DeLuca over here some place, and I was good friends with Cynthia Biagiotti. She was married to Fibber, and during high school she worked in the pharmacy, and she always used to, her friends used to tell the story, not her. And this man came into the pharmacy and asked her for rubbers. And she said, "Oh, you're in the wrong place. You've got to go next door to DeLuca's." So when I heard DeLuca's, I always think of the Cynthia Biagiotti story.
That's good. It's a good ending to this.
A little levity.
Thank you all so much for coming to the Historical Society today. We really appreciate it. We're going to do this every month, so the next meeting will be Tuesday, July 18th at 10 o'clock right here for about an hour, and we'll continue the conversation about something else in Ridgefield's history, and the topics will overlap and intermingle. And I have learned so much. It was such an honor to hear your stories about your Italian-American family members and friends who lived here in Ridgefield. So thank you so much for coming today, and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.